All right. Welcome to our 37th annual University Authors Receptions. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us virtually. We know it's not quite the same as in person, but we hope it still meets our needs. I am Ruth Monnier, she, hers, Learning Outreach Librarian. Before we get started, there's a couple of things we would like you to do. If you wouldn't mind using the chat, tell us your name and how many university author receptions have you attended? Have you been to all 37? Is this your first time? Either way, it's fine. We want to know. We also want to remind you that we are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Axe Library. So if you would come in person to physical display or you do any photos of today, feel free to tag us. We'd love to see you on our social channels as well as in the building. So I'm now going to turn it over to my fellow colleague, Jorge.
Good afternoon. My name is Jorge Leon, Learning and Outreach Librarian at Axe Library. He, him, his. I'm going to get you some directions and ideas for today's chat. We're going to talk a little bit about, as a reminder, it's a university event. We are recording it. All university virtual events are subject to university standards, including Code of Student Rights and Responsibility, PSU policies, local and state federal laws. So please act responsibly while on chat. Going to ask a couple of things about this. If we can keep our video on, it'll give us an opportunity to create a more engaging atmosphere. I know we're not able to meet in person like we normally would during these, so this will give us a chance to see and have that reception feel. Please keep an eye on what's on your in the frame of your video or your camera, and stay muted when not talking. If you're not comfortable using Zoom, you'll see the little red mic with the indicator if your video is muted. We ask that for Q&A, you use the chat feature. I will be keeping an eye on the chat feature and relating any questions brought up. So please help us keep this going in that form, and please be considerate using the chat. Let me turn it back over to Ruth, who has a few extra words, and she can take over.
Thanks, Jorge, and thanks for your help throughout today's presentation. Now that we've had some time and we're still introducing ourselves in the chat, we would like to commemorate in this historic moment our first virtual university authors reception. So we're going to take a photo. We're going to screen capture. So if you would like to turn on your camera, we will do a quick snapshot of that to have that for the archives. Otherwise, our archivist might get a little upset with us. We like to keep the things as they are. So please prepare your smile. We will let you know when we're done taking the photo, so you don't have to worry if you would want to have your video on for this. And it will be real quick. So one moment.
Right. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Managed to get everybody in one frame. Fantastic. There we go.
So thank you for participating with our first virtual university authors and being willing to take your photo. I would like you to now listen to our Dean of Library Services, Randy Roberts, for a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Ruth. When you said we were going to be videoed, I kind of felt like putting my mask back on, but I do want to thank each of you for joining our annual recognition of university authors and their scholarship. I'm really grateful that the librarians were adamant that we would find a way to continue this tradition in this new alternate environment. And congratulations to our authors who continue to research and write and publish in this unusual time. You know, like many or most of you, I think about what we've done virtually in the past few months. We've attended committee meetings, we've done webinars and online conferences, we've answered reference questions, we provide online instruction, conduct hiring interviews. We've created virtual exhibits, we've had book clubs, we've hosted a community book read of a graphic novel, and we've organized panel discussions. It just goes on, the things that we all have done. You know, today's authors event is also another example of how we can adapt to this environment caused by the pandemic. I also miss seeing all of you in person, and I certainly am missing the traditional reception food, but I am excited that today we will be able to hear some of our authors talk about their research, their writing, and their publishing experiences. I don't think we've done that in the past. And so congratulations to all of our authors. Thank you to University Administration for supporting our campus authors. Thank you, librarians, for continuing this event. And thank all of you in the audience for joining us today. So back to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Randy. Before we go on to the next thing, we want to take a moment to recognize, and I'm hoping I'm collecting the right screen. So if I didn't, I will be upset with myself. All of those who submitted articles for this year's university authors receptions for 2020. We know 2020 has been a crazy year, so the fact that our faculty and staff across campus and all the colleges were able to submit and be published in this year is really monumental. And so we really want to take this moment. We know some people may not be able to come to the in-person display or get there to recognize the work that was done by our fellow colleagues across campus.
I'm glad you had a chance to bring that up because I think that's a big part of this. I've always enjoyed that this event gives me an opportunity to see colleagues that I don't, maybe throughout the semester don't have a chance to overlap with or meet with them. And it's a way to do that networking opportunity. So even being able to see everyone's work here and be able to continue to honor that, I think is a great chance for us to do.
Yeah, I just think it's always remarkable how much is published and what's being published across campus. But I think just particularly this year, I mean, we had 2 months and then we were in the pandemic. It's just amazing. And to see what people are writing and being producing is across. And it's all everybody. It's not just only one college or one department. It's university-wide. We're still managing to output as much as we are. It's just phenomenal.
It always makes me feel like a slacker, though. So we'll keep that one there.
We do appreciate as we go across. It's also interesting when you come in person, or if you haven't already, we do have, if you found the Zoom link for this, the authors page on our website that shows the bibliography.
I'll be throwing that up in the chat in here in just a second.
That those are available and what people are working across collaboration. I thought I saw Randy Windsor on here earlier, and so if you're still on, shout out. Worked with University Police, and I believe it was Terrance Pierce. So working those cross-campus collaborations that are happening in different departments that you may not think would naturally go together, but it does. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not mean to pause. So I think that was everyone across that. So thank you again for everyone who submitted, and we do recommend, this is an annual event as we had mentioned, so of course you are welcome to do so in the future as well.
And it is worth noting that due to time and schedules and everything, we missed some authors. Please help us submit those, send us our way. We will make sure to get them into the next year's session. This is something that is a commitment for us to continue year in, year out.
We will now go to our first author submission, and it will be just one moment on my end. Unfortunately, they were not able to join us live afterwards. So for this first one, we will not be able to do any live chatting with the author. We'll just get to hear their prepared remarks. So in one moment, we will have that going, and I apologize for the delay.
My name is Donald Baack. I go by Don, except for titles on books. I'm a professor in the College of Business at Pittsburg State. I teach in the areas of management, and I write in several other areas. So that's my background. I've been at Pitt State for 31 years. I have had a working relationship with a company called Bridgepoint Education for about 10 years. And I've done a couple of other projects with them right around 2010. A few years later, they approached me, excuse me, and they said, would you be interested in preparing a healthcare management book? And my answer was sure. My area is management, but not exactly what you'd call an expert on the healthcare field. They said, can you find an expert who you would be comfortable with to co-author? And I said, yeah, he's right down the hall. His name is Art Fisher, who had his degree in management, but also in healthcare from the University of Missouri. He was at the time a professor here. And I said, would you be okay with him being the second author so that I can take the management part and we can blend in healthcare? And so Art and I sat down and had quite a few conversations. And when you talk about that field, it's really sweeping because you're talking about something as small and entrepreneurial as a doctor's office all the way through a major hospital. And then you have walk-in clinics, you have diagnostics. There are a ton of different organizations. And then just to put another layer on it, some of them are profit-seeking, some of them are non-profit. So I said, the principles of management apply to all of those things, but the applications get a little bit different when you talk about motivation, when you talk about leadership, when you talk about communication, when you talk about how do you manage teams and groups, because you're dealing with essentially a series of really high-powered professionals, and you're also dealing with the janitorial staff. So it's a really different kind of environment. And I had to learn terms like slips and falls, which I had no idea what that meant, but that's something they worry about as a liability issue in the hospitals. So Art was able to bring that to the project. And then we put together the original edition of the book, I believe in 2003 or 4. The book's been used for quite a while. And they decided, now it's time for an update, a second edition. Well, since then, Art has retired, and that's where the new third author came in. It's a totally different animal. This company was called Bridgepoint at the time. Since we wrote the first edition, they're now called Zovio. They were acquired. It's a very targeted audience, for one, and for two, it's not like, and I piddled around with it, I've never succeeded, but I've written novels and I've never sold one. You get to chart the whole course. You decide what the characters are, you decide how they're going to evolve, you decide what issues are. You're basically in charge of the whole thing. A couple of my other textbooks with other companies, we pitched, okay, this is what we want to do. This is different in the sense that they know what they want, and so you basically negotiated a table of contents, which most other books don't work that way. And then you put together an outline, and then you agree to the outline, and then you fill in the spaces. So it's a totally different process. Some folks will say, well, you don't get to be as creative. Well, yes and no. You fill in the content, but around that content, they want short cases, usually 1 to 2 pages. They want very short little learning exercises about a paragraph. So that's when you're watching the news, that's when you're reading articles, that's when you're looking for things to say, well, this demonstrates that concept. The whole process of textbook, fortunately had this explained to me about 35 years ago, was concept, explanation, example. That's never changed. And so that's essentially how you work through any kind of textbook that I've been accompanied with. It's just the putting together of how it's going to proceed. And one of the ones I'm working on right now, they really are leaning heavily on, we've got to incorporate 2 issues. One is how technology is changing the world. And the second was, we really got to deal more with ethics and social responsibility. So that kind of flavors how you write everything. And when you're thinking of examples, you're trying to find examples that demonstrate, adapt what you're doing. But that's how the process is different from other kinds of writing. When it comes to writing, Practice is what makes you better. And practice with feedback makes you even better. And I probably, in my writing career, learned more by being edited than any other way. So, in my way of dealing with the world, the two things that are key to writing are rewriting and letting other people teach you. But to get back to a really short answer, if you want to break into writing, just keep writing.
I think that's some good advice as we're in National Novel Writing Month, and Academic Writing Month is to first get that pen to paper. Always the first step is sometimes the hardest. So again, unfortunately, Dr. Donald Baack wasn't able to be with us, but we did get to hear a little bit about his book, The Essentials of Managing in Healthcare Industry. So thank you.
I am always something intrigued by the process and the number of years I've participated. I know I got a chance to see everybody else in the chat of how many years they had participated during our university authors. This is now going on my 7th year, and every time I've participated, I've wanted to be able to scratch a little deeper that question of what was your writing process. I really do enjoy getting a chance to hear from each, and we'll be hearing from additional authors, their processes and their mental models and everything else associated there.
So next up, we're going to first hear a little bit pre-recorded from Dr. Rebecca Brannock, and then we'll get to hear directly from her. So if you have questions, save those to the end for the chat feature, and we are going to get those up for you in just a moment. And hopefully you are enjoying this as much as we are, and as much as we had also hearing from each of them. And I forgot to hit the button for you guys. I'm sorry. It's helpful when I do the right buttons on the Zoom. So thank you for your understanding with the technology. Now, second try.
Well, the book that I'm referring to is Meet My School Counselor, Mrs. Sparks. And I wrote this book at the time in honor of my mentor, Dr. Roseanne Sparks, who was a faculty member at PSU for many years. She was my advisor when I worked on my EDS and counseling from the Department of Psychology and Counseling. And I basically followed her footsteps. So it was in honor of her. The story is written as a way that school counselors can talk about the way that they can help children in their schools. And there aren't a lot of children's books available on the topic. I wanted it to be one that school counselors could use in their orientations with students during their classroom counseling lessons that talk about the various ways and roles that they depict in schools. And it's a story that mimics my mom's life. The main character, Helen Jane, is actually a little Filipino girl who goes through some difficult times. In my mom's life, she experienced the death of her mom at an early age. And had my mom had a school counselor in the Philippines at that time who could have helped work through that loss, these were some of the ideas that I thought the school counselor might be able to help her with. I donated copies of my book to several area schools to be able to get it into the hands of children. And there really weren't a lot of books available on this topic, and that's what prompted me to write the book in the first place. And it's a way to be able to give back to the profession. I actually have a second book that's going to be coming out in 2022. It'll be a continuation of this book. The title of that one will be The Many Faces of Helen Jane, and it will be a story about diversity, about kindness, empathy, acceptance, all the things that I really believe children could benefit hearing from. Well, I certainly don't claim to be an expert in getting books published by any means, since I've only written 2, but I just began jotting ideas down as I went along. you know, I wrote the story in a short amount of time. What proved to be the biggest challenge was finding an illustrator for my book. I thought I had someone secured, and that didn't work out. And so I actually asked a college roommate that I knew from many years ago who was an art major. She agreed to work with me on this project, and she did just a fabulous job. The illustrations throughout really help bring the story alive. So I was thrilled, and she is willing to work with me on the second children's book. And so that's pretty exciting. Um, I had this book published through Jet Publishing, and I certainly didn't write it for what the royalties would bring, but more being able to give back and make a contribution to the profession. My goal was to write the book and to get it published before Roseanne Sparks died. And fortunately, I was able to do that. She unfortunately died at the beginning of October this year. But I've got to tell you that it was heartwarming to me to be able to share this book with her while she was still alive. I went to, as soon as I had a copy in hand, I went to the um, Carrington place where she lived, the assisted living center. They weren't allowing visitors to come in at that time, but I was able to show the book to her through the window and was able to read parts of it. She smiled the biggest smile, and the administrator there said that was the happiest she had seen Roseanne since the pandemic started. So timing was really perfect as well. Writing a book was on my bucket list, and so I started just jotting ideas down as they came. I would encourage you to talk to others who have published. I asked lots of questions before my first one. And research publishing companies who might be interested in publishing your book. I'll go back to the first book that I published was actually a textbook that came out this past year in 2019 through Cognella Publishing. I visited with an acquisitions editor there, and she wanted to find out, you know, what my ideas were for my book. When she realized that it sounded like a book they would be interested in publishing, then she invited me to submit a prospectus, which I did. That included my first chapter, details on the book itself. Once that was received, they sent it out for some peer review comments and realized that it was a book that other counselor educators were interested in as well. I signed an 18-month contract with them. For that one, I wrote the draft during my sabbatical semester in the spring of 2018, and then was able actually to meet that 18-month contract deadline to finish it up. And like I said, that one came out in 2019. I would say to you, enjoy the process. I certainly enjoyed writing the children's book much more than I did the textbook, to be honest with you. But I plan to continue writing into my retirement. After having been an educator for, this is going on my 41st year as an educator, I feel like I still have ideas that I want to be able to share with others and to be able to give back to the profession. So I wish you well in your endeavors, and anything is possible with having published these two, and just the goal of being able to publish some more in the future. It is definitely worth the efforts that you put into it. Thanks for listening.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and spotlight Rebecca. And if there's been a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll have opportunity to go ahead and hear from those. But first off, before we get to those questions, congratulations, 1, on the book, but 2, for 41 years in the classroom. That's amazing.
You know what? It after the COVID experience, it really feels like it's been a long time since mid-March, to be honest with you. But we're surviving, as everybody is. Just glad to be getting through it.
Yeah. Well, we're glad. I would say your story is really heartwarming. The 2 story, like, I don't know about other people, but maybe I'm just more emotional, but I definitely got teary-eyed a couple of times. So sorry, I forgot to give a tissue warning to everybody else.
Well, I had some close by.
Appreciate you sharing so much with us. If I get an opportunity to read, we had a question in the chat for you. It was asking about the figure on the cover. It looks a little like Roseanne.
Yes.
Is she the physical model for the drawing?
She is. And Don, I will share with you with your question. My roommate, Jan, who was the illustrator, she had never met Roseanne. And what she asked me for, she said, Becky, can you send me some pictures of her? How you want her to appear in the book. And so she really went with pictures, had me describe Roseanne's personality. And it is amazing, the likeness that she was able to come up with. Just incredible.
That is fantastic. And it's not one in the chat, but it's definitely one that I'm curious about myself. You're talking about wanting to go and do some additional ones. Are you wanting to remain in the kids book area? Where are you wanting to focus after you've had this after the experience, I guess?
Yes, really great question. Definitely the one that I talked about is the kind of the sequel to this one, is going to be my next one in 2022. That one should come out. Cognella has talked to me about the possibility of doing a second edition with this textbook. And so to be able to even update that with the latest ASCA national model. And then I've got ideas that I've just been writing down for other titles, probably not as extensive as the textbook, but kind of in the self-care area. I've got another one, an idea that I came up with a vet of mine that's retired, pet loss, because that is another area. Just a small booklet that would help people who have experienced pet loss. And so some ideas, certainly.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing.
You know, I've got to say thank you for this opportunity. Just appreciate you all of the efforts that have gone into this. Very, very, very pleased. And so thank you.
You're too kind. We're always grateful for so many colleagues contributing all their time and energy. Let's see. Ruth, I think I lost your audio.
Does anybody else want to join me in a round of applause, either virtual applause of reaction or for your fabulous book? And I'm sure we all are looking forward to seeing some future works from you as well, based on what you just said. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next author, but thank you again for being with us. And we appreciate all of the work that it took for you to write your manuscript and allow us to showcase the work. So we're going to go ahead and go to our next author video.
Earlier this year, I published this book, When Sunflowers Bloomed Red, Kansas and the Rise of Socialism in America, through the University of Nebraska Press. I co-authored this book with Alton Lee, a retired professor emeritus from the University of South Dakota and a native Kansan. Dr. Lee has published several books based on Kansas, such as The Bizarre Careers of John R. Brinkley, the infamous goat gland doctor who in the 1930s and 40s transplanted animal organs, goat organs, into human beings as part of his practice. He's pretty much considered a quack today. Another book that he recently published was Published for the Masses, Emanuel Haldeman Julius, about the famous Girard, Kansas publisher of the Little Blue Books. I was very fortunate that Dr. Lee asked me to collaborate with this book with him a couple of years ago. We worked several years on it, seeing it published earlier this year. And just read a little bit about what the book's about from the dust jacket, the inner flap. It says, when sunflowers bloomed red reveals the origin of agrarian radicalism in the late 19th century United States. Great Plains radicals, particularly in Kansas, influenced the ideological principles of the populist movement, the U.S. labor movement, American socialism, American syndicalism, and American communism into the mid-20th century. Known as the American Radical Tradition, members of the Greenback Labor Party and the Knights of Labor joined with prohibitionists, agrarian Democrats, and progressive Republicans to form the Great Plains Populist Party, later known as the People's Party, in the 1890s. And some of the people that we cover in this book is like Eugene Debs and Julius A. Whalen, the founder of the publisher of the Appeal to Reason, Emmanuel Haldeman Julius, and a lot of the socialist individuals who are involved in Kansas politics. My writing style in doing this and my other projects has been to really do your due diligence and research, make sure that you do an exhaustive research, and keep your materials, your writing style formal, particularly if you're going to be publishing through an academic press, and document as you go. It is very difficult, as I found out before, and I was told, to try to go back later and figure out where you got your sources to cite it. So keep that going as you are writing. And any tips that I would give to people who wanted to write, especially nonfiction, is know who your audience is, who you're writing to, and to have some ideas as to who's going to publish it. If you're going to go through an academic press or another press out there, you need to know their style.
Sorry, one moment. There we go. Thanks for those starting off words, Mr. Steve Cox, about where the sunflowers bloom red. Reminder for anyone that you can put any questions that you would like to ask in the chat. While we are waiting, first of all, congratulations on your book, but I've been curious the whole time and I haven't asked you. I've been holding on to this question. How did you guys come up with the title?
That was Dr. Lee's idea. So I know the subtitle, Kansas and the Rise of Socialism in America, was actually the publisher's idea. We had a separate subtitle for that, but the idea, of course, with Kansas being the sunflower being the state flower, and we're dealing with socialism, which with a little sidetrack of communism, it just seemed like a natural title when sunflowers bloomed red.
Makes sense. We did have another question come into the chat, so thank you for satisfying my curiosity. Someone asked, does this work inform readers about the political context of today?
Not really, because we're not as radical. The state of Kansas is not as radical as it was in the first half of the 20th century. It was much more socialist, much more populist, although that's kind of popular today. But I don't. The only thing I can think that, well, I won't go into that. But no, it really doesn't reflect on the current political scene today, especially in the state of Kansas.
All right, we had a couple more questions come in. I'm going to start with looks like a simpler question. Does Axe Library have a complete collection of the Little Blue Books?
I'd say it's about as complete as anybody has. If it's not complete, I would say probably 99.9% complete, because Haldeman Julius, especially in the early years, changed a lot of titles, replaced numbers with different titles, and it wasn't very well documented, although in the last couple of years, a full bibliography of the Little Blue Books has come out, and it itself is about 500 pages long. But it's kind of hard to track some of the earlier titles of the Little Blue Books, especially when he replaced them with ones that weren't selling very well, or changed the title a little bit. And he didn't, early on, he put additions in the little blue books on the covers, whether it was a first or second or third edition. Later on, he didn't do that, so it's hard to tell what might have changed and went unrecorded.
Thanks. And it looks like our last question for you before we move on. So I hope you're ready. Were you responsible for individual chapters within Where the Sunflowers Bloom Red, or was it more of a case of co-writing chapters and correcting each other's work?
I was brought in on it after Dr. Lee had the first manuscript done and to the publisher. His health had declined to the point where he could not finish it, revise it, make the corrections and the additions that the reviewers made, and proofread it basically. So that's where I came in. I added content to it, corrected some name errors, date errors, and selected the photographs for the inside and for the cover, and checked the bibliography to make sure that was correct. But I actually did quite a bit of writing in it to match what the reviewer suggested needed to be added or at least enhanced.
Well, thanks for answering all those questions, and congrats again on your manuscript. Applause, either the reaction or virtual. Congrats to you, Steve. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next author. So let's see if I get speedier as we go on.
My name is Grant Moss. I am a professor of Spanish. I've been here at Pittsburg State for 10 years. I get a chance to work with students from the first semester all the way up to the last semester. And one of the things I noticed over the years, and which is the reason why I'm sitting here with you today, is I noticed that for some reason we have this issue with writing. We think that we can't write, even if we can speak okay. And so the title of my book is actually called Speak the Way You Write and Write the Way You Speak, A Guide to Effective Communication. And my whole thought was, because about 3 years ago when I was on sabbatical leave in Spain, I thought, I could do something here. I could really help my students here, because I was translating a 900-page book from Spanish to English. and I've done some translations before, but I've never done a project of such big caliber for characters. So what I thought was, well, let's see how I can go about this and what my process is. And anyway, so while I was sitting there thinking about it and what I was actually doing, I thought, I bet I could really help my students out, because a lot of times we think there's some process that separates both writing and speaking. And I don't know if it's because in our world today we do a lot more writing, we value writing more. Literacy is considered a writing, which makes sense, and reading, of course. But we don't talk much about the relationship that it has between, with the relationship that exists between writing and speaking. We just don't do that. And so that's what I started thinking about that 3 years ago as I was translating this book, because I thought, what's the essence of what I'm trying to do here? I want to get the essence of what my colleague was trying to produce in Spanish, and so that's also comprehensible in English. And so that really started getting me thinking about, well, what's our real problem? Why can't we sit here and say, if I can speak in a formal setting, why can't I write in a formal setting? What seems to be the problem? Why is there such a disconnect? And so that was what I was really starting to analyze. And anyway, so this book came about from that process. But if I can speak in a coherent manner, why can't I write in a coherent manner? And then I think that for some reason we think these two processes are divorced nowadays or something like that, but I don't buy it. So that's the whole premise of the book. It's a short text, and it's designed basically to say, what are you thinking about when you write? What exactly is going on and the writing process for me is something where I sit down and I thought, if I can read this out loud to myself and it makes sense, then it's going to help me out. Because if I don't divorce these two processes, which I don't really believe they were really meant to be divorced. In fact, there's one anecdote in the book that talks about scripture, be it, there's a biblical text that I actually use, and it talks specifically about how they would read. And there's this idea of literacy and reading was actually, they said they read the book out loud. And that was how people heard. Granted, things have changed over many millennia. But I was really impressed, and I really started thinking about, why has it been divorced? And then, so my writing process was that way. Have I really separated these two processes? And so my writing process was like, I noticed myself, and maybe you do too. You sit there and you start thinking, you're sitting there writing, and then you're starting to lose the thread. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I start losing the thread, and I start saying out loud to myself. And I do that when I read sometimes too. I'm sitting there and we're not really focused on what I'm doing, so then I go back and wait. I maybe read like a whole page, and like, what did I just read out loud? Maybe what I just read. So you go back and you do it again, and you miss it again. And then what you do is you say, okay, I've not. So you start reading it out loud to yourself. And I think that's the writing process for me. It's this idea of what exactly do I want to communicate. And as I say it out loud to myself, I don't do that all the time, and I probably should. What is it that I'm trying to communicate? Because we can't really communicate tone. I mean, that is a difference between speech and writing. A lot of times that's missed. So as we say it out loud to ourselves, it helps us to overcome any type of confusion. So the writing process for me is, how can I avoid that confusion? Over the past 10 years, I've realized how confusing I've been in writing, granted, and in speech over the years, and how I can get both of them better. My whole career is, if you don't give up, if you think that maybe it's just not for other people, but if you keep just trying to see through of it. And I love that. I tell my kids that all the time. I have 5 children, and I always tell them, I've got ages 16 to 8. And I always tell them, hey, you can put the effort in. And the more effort you put in, the better you get at something. I think a lot of people think, oh, you got a specific talent. You guys, I don't have any talent. I don't. I thought somebody needed to hear this. I worked hard at getting it edited, and then I sent it out to people. And somebody saw that and said, well, no, this is really rough. But it was the effort. They didn't see my effort behind all that. But I did. And so and I think that's the idea that led me to continue. And that's why I worked on this translation. I couldn't find anybody to publish the translation either. And they really were interested. And I didn't really know, I think the idea is we don't really know where to look. There are plenty of people that would have published that. I just didn't know where to look. And so maybe these 40 rejections for the first book were like, you're barking up the wrong tree. You're not in the right, this isn't the right field for you. Or maybe we don't publish those type of texts. And that's what I found out with the translation was, they really were, the editors that I was sending it off to, they were like, no, this isn't really for us. Even though I thought what I read from what they were publishing, that it might fit really well with their collection, that wasn't the case. And so, anyway, that's something that I would, the advice I would give for anybody that's looking to publish a book. I would say, please, don't give up. And it's not, you can't value yourself as a person because someone doesn't accept your text.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Grant Moss, for your opening remarks. I want to start off, I think we have a question in the chat, but I wanted to start off with saying I really appreciate your transparency. I think even though this is a celebration of manuscripts that have been completed and published, sometimes we forget about the rejection and the hard work, the back end of what happens behind the scenes. So I think that was really helpful for all of us and viewers to recognize the hard work and how many times we get rejected or failed or our work gets rejected, but it's not us personally, and that keeping going is important.
One of the biggest challenges I think that I have is I send something off and somebody says no, and I'm like, I guess I'm not good enough. I mean, I think that's something we always have to deal with. And so it's really neat when after sending out 40 or 50 letters and saying, hey, will you accept my book? Is this something for you? And it's no, 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 no. After a while, when you finally get the acceptance, you're like, maybe it is worth something. All those other 50 don't really matter when all is said and done. So, but yeah, it's something that I think I don't know, like the other authors here might say, hey, it doesn't come the first time usually. And in many cases, like in my case, sometimes it just falls in your lap. So, if you just keep working at it and don't give up, there's that possibility there.
Perfect. Sorry, go ahead, Jorge.
No, I was gonna say great. I love the enthusiasm and I love the idea of the perseverance because I think it is something for us to always keep in mind. I was gonna follow it up with one of the questions we had in the chat. Wonderful idea to use speaking as a model for writing and writing as a model for speaking. Good writing, however, involves revision. What do you say about this in the book?
Do I talk about revision in the book? Oh, there's a whole chapter that where an anecdote that I give there is, I don't know about you, but maybe sometimes you or someone you know, maybe a student or something would say, well, I've submitted, I've turned it in, wash your hands, they're done. Or maybe you've done that yourself. I never do that. Of course not. But I think that there's the anecdote that I use to say, no, you're never really done with the text. You're never really done. And I think that we have that notion that it's gone, it's off my table, and therefore it's done. And that's a myth. And it's a myth for me anyway. Maybe for others it's not, but that's the whole revision process. And I really appreciate the question because I mean, even after you get it published, I'm sure Becky and Steve and Dawn and the other Dawn, everybody that's talking today, we know that you could still go back and look at that page and be like, I don't like how that turned out. I could do it better this way. Or, oh, you know what, that part where you're talking about this, well, I could have made it so much better. And even next year, you find out something you didn't know and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. My book's, I have to rewrite the whole thing. You know, because the new research comes out or a new idea comes out, or you just hate this sentence, or you feel like it doesn't communicate what you wanted to communicate. So I think that question is very appropriate because that's what the entire premise of the text is really about. It's like, no, if you can talk, I understand that you can't go back and really correct yourself in the same way as you can in writing, but you know, at least you can say, well, this is what I really meant. And so I think that revision process is saying in writing, this is what I really meant.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well put. So I don't see any other questions coming into the chat for now, but we do want to congratulate you again, and virtual applause, reaction applause. You can hear my applause. I always do a round because circles are fun.
Here's a applause for myself. There you go.
Perfect.
Not arrogant?
No. Gotta be proud of ourselves. If we're not proud, who will be proud for us? We're gonna go ahead and we're going to move on to our next and final author of 2020. So we're gonna hear their remarks, and then we'll have questions and a couple other things. So hopefully you're all enjoying these as much as I am. And here's our last one.
I want to discuss a couple of books that I've written this year or finished this year. One is The Mind of Charles Hartshorne, Critical Examination. It is co-authored with George W. Shields. And the other book is called Philosophy in a New Key, which is actually self-published. And it's about the lyrics and the songs that I've written that express my philosophy. But first, The Mind of Charles Hartshorne, co-authored with George W. Shields. Unhappily, George died last August, so he can't be part of this celebration. Here's a picture of the two of us back many years ago. Very sad to not have George with me. But George and I discovered many, many years ago that we had common interest in the philosophy of Charles Hartshorne. We had both written our dissertations on his philosophy, and throughout the years, we were writing very, very similar, sometimes parallel articles without even consulting each other. We finally decided that we needed to get together and write some things. So we wrote a book. George edited a book in which we had an article that was co-authored, and then we eventually approached I eventually approached the editors of the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy to write an article on Hartshorne. And so we did that. The article ended up being actually 4 articles. It was too long for a single article. And then George and I decided that it needed to be a book. And the result is The Mind of Charles Hartshorne, a Critical Examination. This started, I guess, in 2010. So the book has been 10 years in the making. And it's a substantial book. I mean, it's 500 pages long. So, but it's dealing with a subject that was dear to both of our hearts, is still dear to mine. So Hartshorne lived from 1897 to 2000, lived to see 3 centuries, and philosophized in 2 of those. He was pretty much active until his death. He only started to decline, I think, probably a year or two before he died. So he wrote many, many books and many, many articles. He was known, his first book was on psychology. Then he wrote The Philosophy and Psychology of Sensation. Then he turned his attention to philosophy, wrote, over a dozen books in philosophy. And he had a lifelong interest in birdsong. And in 1973, he published a book called Born to Sing, which is about, let's see, the subtitle is World Survey of Birdsong. So he was known as an ornithologist. And in fact, the cover of mine and George's book has a picture of a white-crowned sparrow. We did that because we wanted to acknowledge Hartshorne's interest in birds. Hartshorne was considered one of America's great philosophers. He was educated at Harvard, graduated with a PhD in 1923 after having served in the military in France as an orderly in a hospital in France during the First World War. He moved after Harvard. He went to Chicago University. He ended up in Emory University in 1955, and then in Georgia. And then from Emory, he went to the University of Texas. And that's actually where I met him. I was at the University of Oklahoma, and I met Hartshorne at a conference. And it started a long friendship and correspondence. George also knew Hartshorne. And so we both were familiar with the man and his ideas, and hence we wrote about this. The closest thing to our book prior to ours was written by Eugene Peters in 1970 on Hartshorne's Metaphysics. But in 1970, Hartshorne was 73 years old. He still had 11 books to publish at that time. So Peters' book, while it's very, very important historically and a good summary of Hartshorne's thought at that time, it needed to be, in a sense, updated, and that's what George and I did with our book. So that's a little bit about that book. The other book that I've done, that I put up, was the Philosophy in a New Key, which is lyrics that I've written for songs. I started out as a music major in college at Colorado State University, and eventually found something much easier, which is philosophy. But I never lost my interest in music. My mother was a musician, a very talented pianist and singer. My dad knows a lot about music. He made a career in psychology, but both of them knew about music, and they fostered whatever talent they found in me for music. And so I've played songs, I play guitar, and I've written lots and lots of songs, especially since 2008. So I decided that a lot of those songs reflect my philosophical inclinations, my philosophical beliefs, my philosophical attitudes. And so I put them in the form of a booklet that I self-published. So that's the other book. I look forward to the celebration.
One moment as we pull to spotlight Don, and do you have any questions for him? Feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you again for submitting your remarks on both of your books. I loved the theme of music that was going in. I do want to share this question. There's a couple questions coming in on the chat. Somebody has asked, how many CDs have you released? They know they have at least 5 in their collection. So how many musical CDs have you released, Don?
I don't know. Really, I don't know. I can find out really quickly here, though, because I have a list. Let me just see real quickly here. Yeah, there's quite a few there. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Well, there's 18 of them. Yeah, so that's a few. Mostly from 2008 on.
Well, somebody mentioned this and I feel like it's true. In a non-COVID environment, I think we would all enjoy hearing some of your musical songs performed for us.
You can hear, there's recordings of some of them at Digital Commons, actually. And so you could hear them there. What I do is I go to Phil Ward's studio. I've known Phil for many years, and he has a really quality studio. So I'm able to record, say, multiple tracks. So if I've got harmonies, I can record harmonies. I can record double guitar parts when I need them, or even there's one song I put a little bit of kind of a fluty part in there, like a flute. And so that's the way I'm able to do that. So if you want to hear some of those recordings, go to Digital Commons and you can find at least an earlier version of the book that I self-published, and with a bunch of recordings also.
I think it would also be good to note, I think we had a question in the chat asking where is your self-published book available?
Right now it's sitting over here beside me in a box. I've thought about taking it over to the bookstore to see if I could sell a few there. Or if anyone wants one, heck, I'll just send you one. So just, send me an email and I'll send you a copy. I need to send a copy. Well, I guess I gave 1 or 2 copies to the library, didn't I?
Yeah, we did grab a copy from you. If you want, we can add one in.
Yeah, I can send you more if you want.
So check out from Axe Library coming soon. So other people had put some other comments about how great it was that you got to meet Hearthstone when he was living. Somebody, I'm gonna call him out because I can. Dr. Moss wants to know when they can work on the new book, The Mind of Don Viney.
No, there's not much of a mind there to work on.
So if you wanted to do a future collaboration, somebody might be in this room willing. This virtual room.
Yeah. No, I'm mostly happy to reflect the light of others. I don't know that there's much light in me.
I think you have lots of light. Your face is just a glow.
Thank you.
With all of it. Yeah. Well, if you have any other last comments, otherwise we're going to do our congratulations virtual applause.
Well, one last comment. I cannot remember who said this. It was someone in the psychology department here, and I'm sorry I do not remember who it was. It might even have been Jan Smith. I was telling her about my upbringing and how musical Mom and Dad were, and how we just had all kinds of music in the house. Dad even built hi-fis and stereos in the old days. So we always had music. And she said, Don, you were raised in a musical. Yeah, that's right. I was raised in a musical.
That will make for a great book.
I was raised in a musical. That'll be the next title.
I was gonna say, always had my own theme music. My own soundtrack was ready. But hopefully everybody will join me in giving Don a round of applause, however that takes place, reaction or otherwise. Thank you again for your submission. We have a couple of final announcements as we wrap up our first ever virtual University Authors Celebration and 37th annual celebration. We want to give first a thank you for being with us here this afternoon. If you're watching the recording, thank you for taking time out of your day to do that. We also want to give a big shout out to all of our manuscript authors who we heard from during this presentation, as well as all those who submitted articles and other publicational works. If you want to learn more about the authors based on what you heard today, or just because you're interested, we encourage that. And you can visit the display on the first floor of Axe Library. That will be up through November 30th. You can even pick up a little hard copy bibliography. There's a select few of those that is also available on Digital Commons. If you want to learn more virtually, please look at the link that Jorge just put in the chat. As a reminder, if you're visiting us in person, please do wear your mask at all times when visiting. And then Jorge has a couple other announcements before we close today.
Ruth, thank you very much. And just a few last parting announcements. The Jean de Gruson virtual exhibit on the Art of Ted Watts is available for viewing via the axe.pittstate.edu site, or it's also downstairs in the Special Collections and University Archives in the basement of Leonard H. Axe Library, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to noon and 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Thanks again to all of our university authors and for all of you for joining us today, this afternoon. You can follow us. You can follow the library on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. Ruth has just posted on the chat the handles. Thank you for that. And the recording of this presentation will be live on our website or after within a few days. So we hope to have that up soon. Thank you everybody again, and hope you have a wonderful night.